Welcome to the Pursuit of Progress podcast, where we are all about chasing that 1% improvement every single day. Now, this podcast is here to ignite your passion for continuous learning and growth. Each week, we dive into fresh conversations and actionable ideas to help you elevate your mindset, sharpen your skills, and transform your life. If you're obsessed with getting better and living with purpose, then you are in the right place. Now, let's get after it.
Well, you know what? Today we're going to talk about something that is so important to me, and I believe that it should be really important to everyone, but it's something that really isn't discussed. And I believe I was actually having a conversation with my kids last night. I believe there's a crisis bearing out of this, and not enough people are talking about it and implementing it. And it's about the ability to have a growth mindset and really believe big. That's what we're going to talk about today. And it's going to be really, really exciting to share.
Love it, man. Yeah, this is something that I know you're really passionate about, and I can already tell just with your two kids how they're leading by example as far as taking this as well into their personal lives as they get into their first year of high school. So, yeah, let's just kind of, again, like you said, just jump right into it. So, I've got a few different points that I just want to kind of go through one by one. And on each of these, Ben, just get your feedback and just your personal opinion on these different things. So, talk first about just learning how to believe big.
Yeah, that is something that is just critically important. I believe that, where that comes from and why it's so important, you have to have a vision for your life. You have to believe that you are here for a purpose, that you have meaning, and that you're going to have an impact on this planet, in your community, and with others. I feel like there aren't a lot of people walking around that really have a defined vision for themselves. I also feel like there's so many of us that just aren't are walking around without a plan and we don't have a vision. I remember being a little kid growing up and, I reflect back and I'm 42 years old to what was my mindset when I was a little kid. And I had these big, bold dreams. I wanted to do things. I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I wanted to go into business. I wanted to be a fireman at one point. And our dreams are only limited by how big our imagination is. And so I think the first step in having a really positive growth mindset is that you have to have the ability to believe.
Love that. Yeah, there's a common acronym used in a lot of business growth type programs, including the one that I talk about quite a bit called EOS, and they call it a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And just the idea behind that is, if you set your dreams and your goal, a mile high, you're still going to at least achieve a higher level of success than if you had a more realistic, just a goal that was, within reach and not even that audacious. So I think that's a really good just point as far as the size of your goals and regarding vision, same idea, not only just having your 1 year vision, but also having like a 3, a 5, and even like a 10-year vision. And that 10-year vision again is the one that's the big, hairy, audacious goal, the one that's just beyond really comprehension.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Let me share two stories with you. When I was a teenager, I wrote down on my wall that I wanted to be a real estate investor. And I wrote down on my wall on a piece of paper and hung it above my bed that I wanted to own my first investment property by the time I was 30 years old. And so everything I did up until that point was with that in mind. And so it gave me incredible purpose with my finances. Even though at different periods of my life, I've had high income or a low income, and kind of during that 20s, I think started out, it was really difficult to get that momentum build. But the fact that I did have that really, really big goal, it gave more meaning and purpose to all my daily activities. And the second story that I wanted to share is just with my daughter. She started dating and running about a year ago, and one of her goals was to make the varsity team in cross country. She's a freshman this year in high school, and so she put out a plan together, how she was going to accomplish that. And she decided to start running every day. First, she started with a half mile and then up to a mile. And then she built all the way up to 4, 5, 6 miles. And now she's the number one runner on her varsity team as a freshman. And as exciting as that is, it's just kind of scratching the surface. And I just asked her, like, how big can you believe? And I asked her, "Are you starting to believe that you can really do some incredible things with this?" And that's why it's so important that we all have to have an understanding and belief in ourselves, but that we're also really capable of accomplishing anything we want. And yes, it can be intimidating and scary. Make the goal, make the dream, make the vision first, and then start to figure out how you're going to go achieve it.
What a gift to her to have a real life experience like that early on in life, to just understand the fruits of her labor as far as being rewarded by being, the number one varsity spot as a freshman. That's super inspiring. On that same kind of note of cross country and running, we should do a separate episode, talk a little bit more about Prefontaine and the whole like 4 minute mile and how nobody believed that that could ever be, but nobody could ever run a mile below 4 minutes, and that limiting belief. And then now, how many people in the Olympics run under four? It's like every single competitor.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think the world record is almost like 17 or 18 seconds below 4 minutes now.
Wow, I didn't realize that. It's cool. So, kind of again, just piggybacking off of this story about your daughter, let's talk a little bit more about just the youth. We can go a lot of different directions on this, but we'll keep this PG-13 without getting too frustrated, because I know we both are pretty opinionated on some of this. But just the concept of just how lacking the current today's youth is with dreaming big, having goals, being motivated, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was talking with the coach of the coaching team about this. And he's been there for over 30 years. And it just seems like the kids that are really serious are as good or better than they've ever been. The ones that are taking these really serious and are serious about growth and being their best. The problem though is the percentage is so much smaller. So you have this elite percentage, maybe the top 1 or 2% that is as good as they've ever been. And they are just incredible. But the vast majority of kids, I just don't see them dreaming. I don't see them believing. I don't see them wanting really great things for themselves. And I'm around high school kids, very frequently. I have two high school kids. And I just feel like, I'm very critical of giving a teenager a smartphone. I think it's one of the worst things that you can do as a parent. Having said that, my kids got smartphones this year, and kind of probably case by well, there's an ex-wife involved. But I just think it can be so debilitating and damaging because we get so wrapped in to electronics and we stop living, we stop thinking, we don't believe that we can do anything. And it's very disheartening and discouraging. And I don't want to sound like the old person, criticizing the youth, but that's kind of like how I'm feeling. I just really feel like there's this epidemic going on where kids aren't believing and they're not thinking that they can do anything.
Just to share with the audience, I thought it was also really just interesting, something that you shared with me a few weeks back about the participation numbers this year compared to past years. So, for the audience that doesn't know, Ben was a very accomplished cross country runner. I also ran in high school, and I was not following his daughter's footsteps as number one varsity. I was maybe number one on the third string, dripping wet at 85 pounds. But back then, I think in our day, 20 plus years ago now, but we had, I think you said like
Yeah.
70 or 80 participants on the cross country team. And what is it now?
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that because what I did is I looked up the roster from our sophomore year in high school, which would have been 1998. And the sophomores that year on the cross country team, there were more sophomores than the entire cross country team now. So there were like 45 sophomores on the team in 1998. Well, the current roster right now is the low 30s.
So is that with all sports, or do you think cross country is just maybe taking a little bit of a hit in popularity? Or
I
maybe
think there's
football and
an
other
overall.
sports?
I think there's an overall decline in participation, and that's also kind of what I'm referring to. Now, you have certain schools that are going to have a reputation for excelling in academics or athletics, and those schools are still going to get the kids. They're still going to get the athletes. What I'm referring to is just the regular standard school, the regular student body. And it really seems that those participation numbers are down significantly across the board in all sports, and not just athletics, but just kind of after school extracurricular activities.
That's too bad. That's like such a fun time in life and kind of, testing out different activities and seeing what you're passionate about. And I just imagine if you don't do that, how do you even really find like what you're gifted at and what you're passionate about? That's too bad.
Yeah, it's I sometimes I just love competition, and I think it would be so fun to like go be on a team again and just compete, like you can in high school, whether it's football, basketball, cross country. Just getting the ability and the opportunity to do that. And that's a completely another thing. The opportunities that we have here in the United States, just like being born in America. We have these abilities because our country and our nation is so great. Most of the rest of the world, billions of other people around the world, they don't even have these opportunities. And so I feel like we have responsibility to past generations and future generations to really make the most of ourselves, believe big, dream big, and have a really growth oriented mindset.
Love that. Just one last thing before we move on, just this popped into my head since you're really close, obviously, with the head coach of the cross country and
Yeah.
track team, and you're also obviously a coach. But it'd just be interesting to like maybe share with some of these athletes, the very first, race of the year. I'm sure maybe you already do this, but they all know obviously what their time was, but really being able to like track progress and just really celebrate these small wins where yeah, the one, runner that's getting first place and is the number one, your daughter as an example, rather than all the attention being on somebody like that, also really recognizing and celebrating wins for just like the amount of progress other athletes are making. So maybe their first 5K they run at 30 minutes, but then they next week they get it all the way down to like 25, and just the percentage of improvement there is almost a bigger win in some respects than even the person that won that just maybe beat their time by 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this podcast is about. It's about pursuing growth and growing. And that's another reason that I love this. It's great for that reason because there's so much data and analytics where you can really track your progress. Every race is going to be the exact same. You can put strategies together and then you can really start to connect the dots. Well, now I'm going, a minute faster per than it was last year. How did I get there? Well, the reason you did that because you put in more training. You have a consistent pace for the last 12 months. And it doesn't even matter what your time is. Running is one of those sports, unlike all the other sports. If you put work in, you're going to get better. And it doesn't matter what your athletic ability is. And for me, that is always so rewarding, regardless of how fast you're running, to where you can look back and say, you know what, I went faster today than I did 2 weeks ago. I took 2 or 3 minutes off my time from last year. It's very exciting to believe big, put the work in, and then get the results.
Is there a restriction in high school sports to like have a Apple Watch or a Garmin? I think about like nowadays how they have these apps on your iPhone or your watch where it even like tells you like you're 1 second behind your fastest pace. Or I just remember like back in the day in cross country especially, but track too, I guess, with certain distance runs, how
Mhm.
important it was to really understand. You learn over time the pace, and that was like the biggest, I think, strategy for a lot of athletes, especially people like myself that were not very good at this at all and inexperienced. Just understanding how to pace yourself and be able to make it to the end with a certain amount of exertion remaining in the tank for that last, quarter mile or whatever it was. But nowadays, I feel like with all this technology, it's almost like they take out a lot of that strategy that exists in running, where you're needing to kind of feel where you're at and understand your pace and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's so interesting because that's absolutely correct. When we were in high school, this technology didn't exist, and so if your coach said go out in a 7 minute mile, well, you're full of adrenaline. There's 2 or 300 other kids, running the race with you. It's really easy to get caught up in the gallop and go out off pace and go out much faster. Technically, these devices aren't allowed, but everyone has a smartwatch out. For this first race, one thing that goes to play is even with the technology, there are so few kids that actually get use the right. What that comes down to is it's just something
Mhm.
having the discipline to go out and run a smart tactical race And what else can you learn from that? There's a lesson to be learned there. Even with the technology, so few kids are able to do that.
It's all about that tortoise in the hare, man.
Tortoise in the hare, that's right.
So let's move on and just talk about, the concept of, imagination. And we talked a little bit about that at the beginning about having vision and having this, above and beyond goals and vision, the big, hairy, audacious goal that I also mentioned. But just
Yeah.
imagining, the person that you want to be as opposed to who you are today and the strategy or just the benefits of having that type of mindset.
Yeah, and these are my suggestions, and these are all the things that I've done for myself. So the first thing that you need to do is really acknowledge and understand that you matter, that you are important, that you're loved, and that you are here for a specific reason and a specific purpose. You have to acknowledge that. And that's something that I believe to my core. I believe that God created all of us and we're here for a defined purpose. So you matter. Secondly, after you know that you matter and you're here for a purpose and that you're loved and you're cared for and you are going to impact others, start to think about how you envision yourself. Start to think about the person that you want to become. And I'm not talking about faking it till you make it, till you make it. I'm not talking about that. Sometimes you'll hear people and they use that phrase. What I'm talking about is calling your future self, imagining your future self and calling your future self into the present. So visualize the person that you want to be. How does that person talk? How does that person dress? The person that you want to be, a person that you in the future. How does that person attack their day? What type of attitude do they have? What type of discipline do they share? Do they follow through on their commitments? What kind of morning routine does that person have? And start to really think about that and start acting like that person right now. Start believing like that person right now.
Yeah, we both really like Ed Milet, who's a very popular, public speaker, motivational type guy. But he talks about this a lot too, about like his biggest regret is when he passes away one day and is like having a conversation with God to like go into heaven. And it's like
Yeah.
being really confident and just satisfied with the output you put in your life. And you're proud of that person that exists when you're going into heaven, or kind of could take that
Yes.
from a non-religious standpoint, just that person that you want to be and just that person that you want to be proud of becoming.
Mhm. Yeah. So what you're describing is, he says and he believes that when you go to heaven, you get to meet the person that
That's
you were
right.
called to be, the plan that God had created for you. You get to meet that person in their full capacity, in their complete authority, in their fullness. And mentioned that when he wants to, when he sees that person really be looking in the mirror, that he is that person, that he followed God's plan and his that he achieved that. And it is really powerful. A lot of times I'll think about myself when I'm 50, 60, 70 years old, what type of relationships do I want to have with my kids? I will ask myself, what does 70-year-old Ben, it's old 70-year-old Ben tell 42-year-old Ben right now? And a lot of times it's going to be words of encouragement, learning how to take risks. When you start thinking about yourself being 70, 80, 90 years old, that thing that's stressing you out right now, does that really matter? I'm stressed out about this work stuff. Well, if you ask, 85-year-old Adam, would he even remember that? No. And so it allows you to let go of things a little bit more and really make sure that you're focused on the new things.
That's really, really, really good advice. I never thought about that before, but kind of going in a little bit different direction, but just the idea of like being okay with saying no, or just also like walking away from, maybe what the norm of society is doing. Kind of going back to just how the
Mhm.
youth are so limited now today in today's world on having goals, working hard,
Uh,
being motivated. I don't think that's just the youth. I think that's just society in general. So I think this could also be applied to adults and really just everybody nowadays. Not everybody, but a good percentage, larger percentage than I think existed 10 and 20 years ago. But talk a little bit more about just like the idea of like walking away from maybe what the norm is.
Yeah, what I call that is walking away from the 95%. The herd, the direction that everyone is moving is usually wrong. If you want to know what direction you want to go and you don't know what direction that is, just observe what everyone else is doing and then go the opposite direction. And I kid you not, most of the time, that is the right, responsible, and sure way to go. In the United States, we, don't talk like everyone else talks. You know why? Because everyone else is broke. They're depressed. They're not happy. They're not fulfilled. So don't talk like them. Don't act like them. Why is depression in our country so high? Because people, we don't work out, we don't exercise, we want to take that pill for everything. And when when you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see, how could you be happy? How could you be excited? One thing that I am always talking about is if you want to live easy, you have to do things that are very hard. So go to the gym, work out, go for runs, be disciplined. It's very hard to live that way, but it makes life very easy. And another thing, and this is something that I'm gonna really in my soapbox here because when it comes to money, this is not any different when it comes to money. The vast majority of Americans and the American consumer do the wrong things with their money. I know that I've been referenced this before. 99% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck will have less than $2,000 saved. Why? Because of the relationship they have with money, the behavior that they have with money, and what they're desiring. You'll see someone that's really, really successful, and then they'll go out and make this really stupid financial decision. And my thought is always, it's not that they bought that, it's that they've desired that. Well, you'll see someone that has a really high income, and then they'll go buy a car that is so expensive that it's taking all this income that they have and just eroding their cash flow. And it's unfortunate that that person desired that. But that's what we're taught. We're taught to desire these things. And so we move in herds with what we're focused on and what we want. We're letting others define our culture, our society, define what we should be desiring. And that is wrong.
Very good advice. Just one other thing, I think you're going to talk a little bit about. I think with your daughter, idea of again, Ed Milet talks about this as well. And it goes really well with our podcast title, "The Pursuit of Progress and Getting 1% Better Every Day." Just doing a little bit more than everybody else, and
Yeah.
doing that in ways that you get the extra level of satisfaction through feeling more self confident about yourself and just a little bit more proud of taking those extra little steps just to go a little bit above and beyond what, again, the herd, the remaining 95% of people are willing to do.
Yeah, the lesson in that is that if you're always willing to go plus one over your goal, the reason that's so important is because that guarantees that you're going to hit your goal. So if your goal is to go run 4 miles, well, go run five. Because if you run five, you will always hit your goal of running four. And on the same thing, kind of moving back to the herd mentality, along with this right here, it's also why it's so important who you surround yourself with. And if you want to go do, 4 miles, for example, like what around 4 miles, but everyone that you're with is going to go do three. Well, like, what's going to happen to you? Like, are you going to go do four? Are you going to go do five? Or are you more likely to go do three? And so you want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with individuals that share your goals and want to go the same direction with the same velocity as you. And you're going to have to find some pretty elite company because the masses are not going to get you there.
Love it. Hey guys, before we continue on, just want to realize that this current episode was actually sponsored by Roadrunner Property Care. If you're looking to turn your home into a short-term vacation rental, look no further than Roadrunner Property Care. Let their team of experts take the stress off of your plate and put more dollars in your pocket. You can contact them today at roadrunnertucson.com. And Ben, also, before we move on, I'd love just to get your suggestions for the audience. We're doing a new segment we're going to share different things, but this week's actually going to be the book of the week. And would love just to hear what you're currently reading and what value you're getting out of that.
Oh yeah, the book of the week. Some of you know, and maybe you don't know, I love reading, And one of the reasons that I love reading is because I did a challenge with Adam 4 or 5 years ago where, one another thing that we were required to do was read every day. And since then, I have just fallen in love with reading. So I'm constantly reading biographies, books on communication, growth. Right now, I'm reading The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. I'm almost done. And this is what I read this morning. I've never heard of this articulated before. And I thought it was really, really interesting. So, law number 47 from this book, The 48 Laws of Power, this is what it says: do not go past the mark you aim for in victory. Learn when to stop. So, that's the law. Do not go past the mark you aim for in victory. Learn when to stop. The moment of victory is often the moment of your greatest peril. In the heat of victory, arrogance and overconfidence can push you past the goal you had aimed for by going too far. You make far more enemies than you defeat. Do not allow success to go to your head. There is no substitute for strategy and careful planning. Set a goal, and when you reach it, stop.
Interesting. I need to digest that a little bit. At first glance, when I first hear that, it sounds a little counterintuitive. So maybe speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing where, because I'm the keeper, I'm someone that likes getting results and see how far I can take those. I think what it means though is once, have a goal, have a vision. Once you hit that, stop, reevaluate, make new goals, make new visions, and proceed again. When I think of this right here, what I think of in sports is teams not running up the score. That's become, very you don't see that nearly as much as you used to, but every so often there's a team that will just run up the score. Last year, for example, the Miami Dolphins beat the Broncos. They came within like 2 or 3 points of setting the all-time NFL record.
And they've already
And
gotten it.
how? And it was like 13 minutes of the fourth quarter left, so I mean they could have easily done it. But when you go too far, a lot of times just it means that you're humiliating someone. And when you do that, you create more enemies and it really starts to work against you. Kind of what your original goals were. So this book is really about being mindful of your power, learning how to hold on to your power, and then understanding your environment and having a heightened awareness about how your actions are impacting others. And so when you go too far, you're going to make adversaries, uh, or you might gloat, or you might be overconfident. The story that the book here talks about in general from 300 or 400 years ago, and how he was kind of just conquering all of Eurasia at the time, and just did not stop. Because he thought he was invincible, he was overconfident, he was arrogant, and he finally met his match, and his entire army was destroyed, and everything that he had built over that 20 or 30 year period was gone. And so
Mm.
that's what it means where you're also kind of your most vulnerable when you hit your goal and then go past it. So it's also a great time to pause, reflect, and then reevaluate.
Celebrate the win and create a new goal and go from there.
Yes, sir.
Before we kind of wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit more about having a growth mindset. But before we do that, if you guys are enjoying this episode, if you guys are enjoying any of our episodes, do us a solid, share it with a friend, help us expand our audience and our reach. We're putting a lot of time and effort into this. We really just want to grow the show and help as many people as we can. And the best way for us to do that is for you to either like the episode, leave us a quick review on Spotify or Apple Music. And even more than that, though, if you just have a single person, one other person that you think could get any value out of this, just share the show with them. And hopefully we can get to the point where we're also inspiring them to also get better 1% every day. So now, Ben, let's talk a little bit more then again about just having that growth mindset and like what that really just like means to you. Like what is a growth mindset in your perspective?
Yeah, we talk about living with purpose. The difference between living with purpose and a growth mindset is when you live with purpose is more vision focus on what you want your life to be. Growth mindset to me means that no matter what comes into your life, it can be used for good when you have a growth mindset. We share a quick story with you. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching a movie, and this single mom, a teenager, referred to her 14-year-old boy as an assassin of happiness. And if you don't have teenagers, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you do have teenagers, my goodness, both my kids are teenagers now, and when I heard that expression, I just could not stop laughing, and I've used it like 50 times since then. So when I was describing my teenagers, I used to use very negative language, like these kids are so difficult, I can't stand them, I'm really not enjoying this period of my life. I would say things like that, and what I realized is that I was projecting very negative things out of my mouth and into the world. And it was creating more negatives for me. Now I understand that these teenage years are incredibly important for child development as they transition from children into young adults. But now I'm using language like, my teenagers are giving me the platform to refine my patience, to learn how to become a better communicator. I'm becoming more understanding, to allowing me to grow as a parent. Now, I still might have a smirk on my face because, what that means is there is a lot of difficulties and challenge, but it's also true. It's also something that I really believe. And the reason I say that is because when I was a teenager, no one gave their parent more hell than I gave my mom. I mean, I was disrespectful, I was rude, I was short, I was always pushing the envelope. And initially, she had a very difficult time relating to me, communicating with me, but she grew. She learned how to communicate. She invested in herself. I remember she used to read books on communication. One of her favorite books was How to Become a Nonviolent Communicator. Well, guess what? Now I'm reading that same book and so many other books that she recommended because the person that she turned into after I was through my teenage years was someone that I respected, that I honored, that I loved. And this person was my mentor. And so I would love to have that relationship with my kids and have them look at me in that same light, even though they don't right now.
Yeah, I don't have kids myself, but I always think about, like the coaches, mindset in the back in the day of like, the best coaches are the ones that you hate at the time, but they're
Yeah.
also the ones that 10 years from now you look back on and you're like, man, that was a great coach. That was a great teacher because they were pushing you a little bit further and, motivating you to be better. So,
Yeah, I mean, do you want a yes men in your life? Or do you want someone that's going to really challenge you? Challenge you to think a little bit more critically, challenge you to grow, someone that's going to help you reconsider your habits. I mean, that's why we're all here. I don't want someone that's just going to constantly tell me I'm doing a great job. Like, give me some criticism.
mhm. So guys, we actually, we occasionally get questions sent in to us from our audience asking us about maybe specific questions or just topics that they think would be, a good episode. We recently received one of these, and that's why we're doing this episode today. And they were actually, I think they steered this one a little bit closer to Ben than myself, but they were just asking, what do I do to improve my growth mindset? I read, books specifically, but like what more actionable type of recommendations maybe do you have, to provide the listener with some guidance on that?
When it comes to growth mindset, one thing that has really changed my life is reading biographies. And the reason for that is because you look at all these really powerful characters throughout history. So, for example, in the past year, I read Phil Knight's memoir about
Shoot
many.
dog.
Jeff Bezos, I read Warren Buffett's biographies called The Snowball. I read Andrew Carnegie's autobiography. I read John D. Rockefeller's Titan. And all of us have, you know, these images of these really successful people sitting high atop a mountain, thinking that, yeah, I mean, when you think of Nike, you just think of global brand dominance. They don't have, I mean, they can do and sign anyone that they want, and they're just no one can compete with them. Well, there was once a time where that wasn't the case, and they were fighting for survival to make ends meet, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy or going out of business so many times. And so every great success has an even better story, and you get to learn about these stories of these incredible individuals. And what you realize is that one thing they all have in common is that they overcame incredible adversity and persevered against the odds. And they did that by not letting those short and medium term challenges defeat them. They learn to become resilient. They learn to take those problems and grow from them. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. We are all co-authors of our own story. So what story are we going to write in our life? That thing doesn't have to defeat you. That thing that's holding you back can make you stronger. It can make you more mature. It can make you a better person, more responsible. So just, and that's what I've adopted. It doesn't matter what comes into my life. Of course, when the successes and the wins happen, that's amazing. But when we go through challenging times, just remind yourself, this is where I grow. This is important because I'm walking through the fire right now and I'm going to become a better, stronger, more powerful person.
Love that. Really excited. Also, guys, make sure you check out our next episode. We're going to be talking a lot more about mental toughness and going deeper into some of that specifically. So excited to share that with you. Ben, I think before we close out, I think it'd be good just to do a little social media shout out. I know that we've been starting to get a little bit of traction with a little bit more followers and engagement with our audience. And do you have any shout outs you want to give out today?
All right, you know what? So this is a true story. I went into Illegal Pete's this week, which is a burrito shop here in Denver, and someone had put up a sticker on the window there where they make the burritos out of the pursuit of progress. Now we don't know who that was, but whoever did that, so cool. So we've seen a couple other things out there in social media, some keychains, and I think some water bottles too. So
Yep.
it's always great to see our fans, our fans of the channel, fans of the show out there with their swag.
And if that was Illegal Pete that did that, Pete, I want to give you a shout out, buddy. Thank you. Before we wrap this up, one last thing. Just want to get you guys to engage a little bit more with us on social. So you can find either of us on our Facebook, Instagram, really any social platform. We actually also put out our full video version of every podcast on Facebook. And you can comment below on that, or you can also do it within Spotify's podcast platform. But we just would love to hear a little bit more about what you guys are doing to improve yourselves. What's that 1% you're doing in your life right now to get better every single day? And hopefully maybe we'll get some engagement on that and share some of those with our audience in future episodes and give you a shout out. So if you have anything that you're doing that you're really proud of and think maybe other people could benefit from, make sure you guys comment and share that with us.
That's right. And the reason the 1% is so important is because we should all be more concerned about the trajectory of our path than our current results right now. And so if you have a very positive trajectory, you're headed in the right direction, you're trending upward, that's more powerful, more exciting than where you're at currently. So keep that in mind.
Love that. Well, I hope you guys got a ton of value out of this one today. You could obviously tell that Ben's very passionate about this topic. And I just thought it was really cool to have some of these personal stories intertwined throughout the entire
Yeah.
episode with his daughter and just the state of the world that we're in today with the lack of motivation and just perseverance and discipline, all these things that I think are really important now more than ever when it comes to getting our country back on track and where we need to be in order to continue to be successful as a country, as individuals, really just in general. So, Ben, I'll let you close out this episode. Anything last you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah. Thank you again for tuning into the show. Believe big. You can do anything, live intentionally, and go create the life that you want.
We'll catch you guys next Friday on an all new episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. See you
The
later.
pursuit of progress.